I wasn't afraid because I was angry in one sense. I was angry as I had seen in the few years I'd been that this whole apartheid system had raped the dignity of so many people. And that probably truth made me righteously angry or whatever. I was just people who were my friends, I saw them struggling with their own self worth because they'd been told for so long as a group of people, and it affects as individuals.
Hi, hello, and welcome to the Lives I've Lived podcast, where I, Megan Asa, chat with guests from all walks of life, uncovering the twists and turns that have brought them to where they are today. This is episode 9 with Margie Gustafson. Margie is a retired lecturer from the Cape Evangelical Bible Institute, specializing in Christian education. She later broadened her lecturing to include leadership, spirituality, and faith development. Upon retiring from full-time lecturing, she was honored with Faculty Emeritus in 2006 from Cornerstone Christian College, now Cornerstone Institute. She is an author of the book, A Journey of Hope Through Change, and my favorite tidbit, she is my aunt. I love this conversation. I'm inspired by this conversation, and I hope that you love this episode as much as I do. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Yay! All right, Auntie Margie, or Auntie Magoo, as I've known you growing up. Thank you so much for being a part of my podcast and sharing your story with us.
I'm glad. I'm glad to do it. And you could picture where I'm sitting because you've been here.
That's right. Yeah.
I look forward to, well, I don't know if I'll ever get back to the States again, but it would have been lovely to see your home. Yeah.
Oh. You've lived so much beautiful life. There's no way we can pack all the beautiful and challenging and special things into 1 hour, but I'm going to try to hit some highlights and talk to you about some things that I feel like are really important to talk about right now. And I'm just really looking forward to hear your wisdom.
Oh, bless you. A lot of years have gone by.
Auntie, can you tell me, how many lives do you feel like you've lived so far?
I would say probably, I'm guessing, trying to think back, maybe 4. I mean, because the longest life I've lived has been here, but even that can probably divide it into 2. So it would maybe 6 in the long run.
Yeah.
But I think I would say maybe 4 or 5. Yeah.
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 Can you give us and the listeners just a little snapshot of what your life looks like today?
Well, I have the exciting privilege of being retired from full-time work. That means I can get up when I want to get up. So my life during the day is basically connecting with different people. It also includes trying to manage how I can get rid of stuff that I accumulated because I don't know what the future or how long the future is in this lovely flat or apartment that I've been living in, but I've accumulated stuff. I got to get rid of it so I can go to the next step, whether that be heaven or another place in a retirement village. But right now, it's basically checking that out, checking in with friends. I do leadership at the church where I attend, so that takes a bit of thought and preparation. I'm part of a ministry team there. Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm debating about is trying to write my own story. I wrote a story of the cottage where I worked for most of my life, but I've thought about the more I look at all this stuff and what I have kept, I thought maybe I should write my own story. So that's going on in my head. Basically, what do I do? I'm retired. I can do what I want. I may go out shopping. I may not. I may sit and read a book. I may not. I enjoy doing my own thing.
I love that. I love the idea of you writing your own book. To prep for this episode with you, I read through parts of the book that you wrote called A Journey of Hope Through Change. And for this purposes, obviously, I kind of focused in on parts of your story. The majority of this book is really about the school, which we'll talk about. But you just have an incredible story. And if you need any help, let me know how I can help you with that.
I might just do that. I tried it when I took a writing course. I had to write a final paper. It's then I started writing, but it was just about 20 years of my life. And I called it My Life of Music, Laughter, and Tears. So that's motivated me to take that and rewrite it and edit it and make it a part of a bigger book for just my story. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about these different lives and different places you've traveled. As I mentioned, you are my great aunt. You're my dad's aunt, or more easily said, my grandma's sister. But you live in South Africa, and we are not from South Africa. So you actually grew up in Iowa on a farmhouse.
In a farm. I was a farm girl. I was the middle of three children, and the freedom of being a farm girl was really a privilege. Yeah. We could have the wide spaces to run in the summer and the difficult things of climbing through snow in the winter. But yeah, I grew up in the rolling hills of Northwest Iowa.
That's amazing. Do you have any like core memories that tend to come back specifically about that time?
Yeah, I think in the hot summer days, and maybe it's because it's summer now here in Cape Town, I often think what the freedom was. I can remember going down. I maybe was with my sisters. I don't remember that. Going down, following the pathway that the cows took to get to the field where they were supposed to be. And I can remember one of the things that was so freeing as in the cool grass, to lay down in the cool grass and just be in this cool place, and just enjoy the freedom of being by this creek and this water that flowed there and follow the pathway of the cows, I guess. And when I was with my sisters, we would go to the creek in the summertime and go walk in the creek in the mud and the mud swishing through our toes. It sounds terrible, but it was lovely. And the only time that we got in trouble with that is when we washed our feet in the tank that was supposed to have clear water for the horses to drink.
No.
Yeah, it was an oh no, all right.
Oh, that's so funny. So after growing up in Iowa, kind of fast forwarding to your college years, you decided to go to school in California. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I traveled for a year after graduating. I went to a Bible college in Nebraska first, and after finishing there, I traveled for a year. And then I got an invitation to go to work in a church in California. And there I was for 4 years in this church, working with children and youth ministry and secretarial and admin work for the church. The pastor decided to move to a new church, and it seemed like it was right for me to move on. And I wanted to complete my degree because I only had a diploma. So that's when I went to Biola. I went down to Biola and was there for 6 months before circumstances said, go back and finish it in the college where you started back in Omaha, Nebraska. So I was in California that I lived for about 5.5 years. Loved every minute of it. I almost called myself a Californian because I really loved it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, like, that's seems like such a drastic change from growing up on a farm in Iowa. What was that experience like for you?
Well, in Turlock, it was a new experience because it was lovely weather that was so different from Iowa. And maybe that's what I loved it. It was cold winters, but it was misty, rainy kind of cold winters, you know? And I lived in the San Joaquin Valley, which was where fruit grew. You know, there was loads of fruit. In the place I lived, I had 3 kinds of fruit trees and pomegranates, and it was lovely. I mean, which I never had. And somehow I loved the freedom of discovering who I was in a new setting. And I think that's what made it so special. You know, I was me on my own journey of life without a lot of people around me that knew me. I started over. I didn't know a soul when I went there, but oh, I made wonderful friends. It was that time in Turlock was very special and very challenging. And then when the season was done, when you talked about Southern California, going down to for about 5 months to Southern California. So I really didn't get to know much about that. I just studied and kept my head to the ground when I was there as I got back into studying again. Yeah.
And then you went back to Omaha to finish your degree.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I went back to it was now a college university where I went back, and so I was able to get my BRE, and that was a wonderful experience going back to that place again and discovering leadership responsibilities and so on there. And there, of course, I was introduced to the possibility of going on the next journey of my life.
Yeah. Were there many women like graduating with degrees at that time?
There were. There were quite a few women. I think it was a period of time in the late 60s and it was late 60s. It was the beginning of the time where the freedom of women to be who they were. I think it wasn't as popular as it is today in career wise. Yeah.
Yeah. So you finish your degree. You've already at this point traveled all around the country, which I can imagine is not the norm of that time. Like, how did was your family really supportive, or were they like kind of questioning, like, why is, Margie going all over the place?
I think that year I traveled all over the Midwest, they accepted the fact that she's doing ministry type of thing. So that was quite fun. I think going to California, it took a little bit more on my parents' part. You know, this is a long ways away. You don't know anybody there, but I think it was that sense within me. I was kind of an independent spirit, and I was not. I had already come to terms, and maybe this is something that is another story in my life, but I had already come to the terms that it was all right to be alone. It was all right to be single, I suppose, is the biggest thing. I come to terms with it was okay to be single. I didn't say I was gifted with singleness, but it was okay, you know?
Yeah.
And I was a whole person, another person. I didn't have to find another half of an apple or whatever, you know? I was just quite okay with that. I'd come to terms with that.
In looking at your life, you were quite young when you had come to terms with feeling like you could be a whole person. I think for you that God would make you a whole person, and that you wouldn't necessarily, that you were complete whether or not you found a partner.
Yeah.
You were a whole apple.
Yeah.
fast forwarding to today, you have remained single. You've never been married. Do you feel like that has held true, that feeling that wholeness, has that stayed with you through all this time?
I think generally speaking, it has, but I would be very dishonest to say I didn't have my moments,
Sure.
because I was not. I had in my mind that if I meet the right person, that would be wonderful. But that right person would have to be something that I didn't navigate,
Mm.
And I know I told the Lord that it's all right. You know what I need to be more, to fulfill the purpose for my life. In one sense, to answer your question, yeah, I could tell you a story why I did, but I don't know how much time we have here. But it all related to a minister asking me at a camp where I was in leadership. At that time, they had to have a man at this camp of girls. But I was a speaker, and I was having so much fun and enjoying life. He turns to me, "You seem to be so happy. Why aren't you married?"
Mm.
And I looked at him and I said, "I don't think happiness relates to marriage. Because for me, I have a relationship with God and his word, and it tells me that I am complete as a person, because God created me to know that have to be complete. And if I ever did get married, I have to bring a complete me to somebody. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh," I said, "I don't need a man to make me happy." I said, that was the beginning, and it sunk into my spirit. I thought, if people feel you have to be happy, and that was of that age in many ways. And when I came here, even more so, you are not an adult even until you've been married. And it's a real pressure. I think that it still carries on. I don't know what you think, but I think that it still carries on. I'm sure you face the same thing, even now, when we're how many years difference in our age. So, yeah, it's carried through because it was grounded in a truth that doesn't change.
Yeah. Hey guys, did you know that the Lives I've Lived podcast is a one-woman operation? Outside my full-time job, I produce, record, edit, create, and manage content for the show. It is a lot of fun, but it also takes a lot of time. So, if you have been enjoying the podcast and are looking for a way to support it, look no further. You can keep my creativity flowing in caffeine with one easy click. Down in the show notes, click support the show. This takes you to a page where you can easily gift me a latte. Above all else, it means so much knowing that you are all listening to this passion project. So thank you. I can't wait to keep sharing even more content. I hope you stay tuned as we continue building a community and sharing stories from the lives we've lived. So you shared about, traveling. You traveled in the US a little bit. You're starting to discover yourself. You're finding that you are a whole person and learning what that feels like and looks like in your life.
Yeah.
How did you first get introduced to South Africa? That's like a very far away from the US, especially in the 60s. It feels extra far away.
Yeah, yes. Well, I was coming to the end before I got my degree in Omaha, where I was at the Grace College of the Bible then. And my degree was in education, in Christian education. And honestly, I was sitting in a chapel that they were having, and I had a biology test coming up. And I disliked the study of biology. Now, I'm not saying I dislike biology. We have to have that. but the study of it, I struggled. I didn't know where I was going with that. So During the 25-minute chapel, I sat there with my book open, studying. I wasn't paying any attention to what was being said until the speaker said, "Now, I am interested to talk to anybody that would like to have a short-term mission experience somewhere else." And my ears picked up. I thought, aha, I think I'll make an appointment to see him afterwards. And then I went back to my studies. And in that appointment, among other things, he asked me, this would be for 2 years. He says, "What other language do you speak?" I go, "Oh, I hardly speak English well." I don't think I took Latin and almost failed that. Languages is not my cup of tea. He says, "That's all right. There's one country that they speak English as one of their official languages, and it's South Africa." Megan, all I heard was Africa, and I thought, oh, dear Lord, oh, my word, no, not, I don't want to go to huts and villages and country, no, 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 no. And then he proceeded to tell me that the place that was open was in a city, Cape Town. Ta-da! And I had then remembered that in the year before we were talking, that the first heart transplant had been done in Cape Town in 1968.
Wow.
So now this was 1969. I thought, Mamma mia, I think I can handle that. So the process began. And it was a short term, which I had to, as you may or may not be aware of, you have to raise your own travel and expenses and find people to sponsor you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the process began. That's how South Africa came into my world.
That's incredible. And so, like you said, you were there in Cape Town for 2 years, temporarily. And what were you doing while you were there for those 2 years?
That's a good question. What was I doing that? Those 2 years, I primarily worked, and here the context of South Africa maybe is good to get clear, because South Africa was still under a government regime that divided people up in groups, and it was a pyramid type of group. The people that were the most important, but the less in number, were the white community, and they were called the Afrikaans people, who had come from various European countries. They were white. Now, according to the government, they were superior. They were privileged white people. They were God's people, and they were special to God. And then it was a group called colored, not like American colored. It was a mixed race of people. It was then the Indian, and at the lower bottom, where the majority were Black. Regardless of how it was almost a flat pyramid, but from the other three groups, they moved them around until they were in areas where only colored people lived, only Indian people lived, and the Blacks were not allowed to go into the. And there's more than one Black language group and groups of people, and so all across the country this was done. Blacks had to carry a pass book to be able to go into areas that were white.
Wow. Within their own city.
Within their own city.
Wow.
And the white areas were usually in very leafy, beautiful, the best areas. Beaches were designated for whites only. Post offices had 2 doors you go in. One side was for whites, the others for non-whites or non-Europeans. And so that whole layout of the country. I say all that because it's important to see that a terrible thing was called the apartheid movement, separate. And that separate was made that there were grass areas where it separated. Nothing was built there. So there was a big space between where people were uh, living. I came into that situation. I lived in a wide area because it was law to do so. But my lifestyle and ministry was in with the colored community, primarily colored, not exclusively to begin with, but those 2 years it was a colored community. And I worked with music, and I worked in camps with children, and I worked with a church group there. So that's how my time was taken up. I was thrown in the deep end in many ways, but I made lifetime friends there who today are my friends. But I was crossing over the line. And my white neighbors said, "Ooh, aren't you afraid? Don't you? What are you going to do? Oh, aren't you scared to go out there at night?" I says, "Why, there are people like you and me." They couldn't get it into their head because you don't go into another area. And the white people had white privilege concept that we, we, they aren't safe people. We don't know them. So basic things of what we face today when we don't know someone, we put them in a category and we're afraid. And if we, especially if we put them in a category where we've been told they aren't as good as us. So I'm divergent, but that's what that's the group of people that I was first introduced to. And as a result, today, these are my family and my friends. It is among what are called the so-called colored, which is the apartheid system no longer officially is, but this was a community and the friends that I made. In fact, one of them said when I was going to talk to you today, Felicia, I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I remember.
Please tell Megan hello. Yeah.
Felicia and her family are the sweetest. I was able to visit you back almost 10 years ago now, which is wild.
Yes.
And I had the privilege and honor of spending time with Felicia and her family, and they are just a joy. And it was really cool to see these people in your life. They really are your chosen family, and how much you all love and support each other. And it was really, really beautiful to see.
Yeah, so that's probably, and then the other thing that probably those first 2 years that became a springboard for the future was that I love music. I traveled with the college choir. I played the piano. My dad insisted I learn to play the accordion, which was a part of my life. I love music. I took music lessons. Never became professional or anything. I just loved it. And so while I was there, they wanted me to lead a choir. What was popular then, the cantata kind of a situation where it was a story that was told through music and so on. And I agreed. And that was another experience. But it was an amazing outcome. I look back at this and I thought, how did that happen? And it only happened because God was in it. Because I wasn't a trained person, but this is how it came about with this first musical. Love Transcending was the name of it. And that prepared me for days ahead that I didn't realize were coming. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool. So you did your 2 years and something clicked in your heart that this was where you wanted to be.
Yeah. I belonged. I felt like I belonged. So I decided that I would go back, and the little trip back went through, it was beautiful, went through Kenya and Ethiopia and Israel and Greece and Rome.
Wow.
And I came back determined that I would carry on going on a full-time basis. Yeah, it pushed me into the next how many years of my life?
Yes.
A lifetime.
So in around 1973, you returned to Cape Town, South Africa for full time. It sounds like before you got there, you kind of knew what you were getting into. Like in those first couple of years, you really saw the divide and the fact of, apartheid and how the government was really narrating who has value and who doesn't based on really either their culture or more specifically the color of their skin.
Yeah.
What was that like for you as a white American coming into this space in Africa?
I think that if I think back of the comments that were made, for me, from my perspective inside my head, I saw it as learning a cultural difference than what I'd grown up. I was not afraid because of the color of skin or anything else. I was challenged because I had to learn a different culture. And the majority of the people spoke English or they spoke Afrikaans with an English overtone to it. There is the colored community in which I work, the so-called colored community. They have their own lingo of Afrikaans as well, and so it was a challenge to me to learn that. Generally speaking, I was simply accepted because I think that it was just, we know this American and she's white and she treats us like people, with value. So I was accepted. But I thought I need to take a course in Afrikaans. And time and again, the people say, oh, don't bother. That's the language of the oppressor. Don't bother. We can understand you. And so consequently, I appreciated their point of view at that time. And I chose not to. I actually have thought about taking a course now, but don't tell anybody. Yeah.
So even though, we're on the other side, and we'll talk more about it, but we're on the other side of really this government divide, Afrikaans is still like a very well-known spoken language there in Cape Town.
It is. It's one of the 12 official languages that we have in South Africa. And I think to the frustration of many, it is still a very primary language that is used in government things and so on. So it is. English is probably the primary. And depending on where you are, if Afrikaans comes next,
Yeah. So to that point, in your book, you mentioned that in 1976, so only a few years after you had come, that the apartheid was really being challenged, and the students of Soweto rose up in defiance against the policy that Afrikaans be the language of learning in the schools.
Yeah.
By September, the student protests and unrest moved around the country and coming to Cape Town in schools. What was that like?
That was a very challenging time. I had come back to the States for a visit, and I was due to go back in that July of 1976. And the basic thought was, don't go back. South Africa is burning. It's dangerous. And at that moment of going back, it was still primarily, the uprising was in, as you read, in Soweto, which was a township up north of us in Cape Town. So I came back without much fear. By the time September came, it had the uprising and the pushing against this and the whole educational policies and so on came to Cape Town. And that included, and it was just the beginning of tear bombs dropping because of the protests and gathering of students and And the government was very concerned that there would be something that would get bigger. So they tried to control it. And marches were taking place. In 1970, I was primarily with the church, but the college was beginning on very grassroots level in an evening school, and it gradually grew to having students. When I came back, I was full time there. We had a campus, and so and at that point we had begun to get a couple white students as well in our college, which was against the law.
Yeah.
Uh, Nevertheless, so there was a lot of concern for us who were traveling back and forth out of the so-called white areas, but I didn't have a lot of fear at that time. So yeah,
When you say you didn't have a lot of fear, do you specifically mean fear of like just different types of people, or fear of like being caught up in a violent act? Like, I feel like I would be wanting to be on the right side of history, but also scared that like something terrible is going to happen to me. Like, how did you navigate that?
I that fear was that I think I wasn't afraid because I was angry in one sense. I was angry as I had seen in the few years I'd been that this whole apartheid system had raped the dignity of so many people. And that probably truth made me righteously angry or whatever. I was just people who were my friends, I saw them struggling with their own self worth because they'd been told for so long as a group of people, and it affects as individuals. On the campus, we took a stand. And as a college, we decided that we would not judge people racially. And everybody came with worth and value. And so when the marches started and so on, and during the 80s, going into the 80s and so on, we participated. And I did some marching, I must admit, with the students. Yeah. So yeah, I moved freely among the churches where our students came from. I wasn't fearful from the stand of would somebody take my life. I recognized that I was a foreigner and I was there on with my proper passport and papers. But I knew that I was taking a stand. I cannot say that I did a lot of upfront as an activist, but within my context, I stood with those that I believed in, as you said, that was right, that was right for humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This feels really important to talk about right now, specifically with just how divided the United States feels, and specifically in Christian cultures. And I think there are some Christians who feel strongly on one side, and there are Christians who feel strongly on another side, intertwining those political lines with Christianity. And I feel like as I was reading through parts of your book and how you specifically, but also this community that you were being a part of, that was a faith-based place,
Yes.
was saying no to the government. That this is not, we're not following the law. You guys were, and that's really impactful to me. Dr. Ashleman, who was a founding part of this school,
Yeah.
he passed in 2015, but his son said some really beautiful things at his memorial. One thing that he shared was, in the criminal years of apartheid, Dad, meaning Dr. Ashleman, built an institution open to all ethnicities, all genders, all creeds. While so many peers were busy tying themselves to doctrinal knots, trying to justify racism with the scriptures, trying to justify keeping women from ministry, Dad simply opened the door to all. That feels incredibly relevant to 2025. What would you say to, I want to say young people, but really just people, maybe us, Americans who are dealing with a lot of opportunity to re-segregate in different ways? What would you say to the young people of America right now? I know that's a heavy question, but like we need do you have anything to share with us?
That's a powerful question, my dear Megan. You're putting me on the spot. Well, the one thing that comes to my mind while you were reading what Gordon wrote as a tribute to his father, I think that the stories that are in that book would affirm this truth. And yes, I don't know if I was living in America, what I would be a struggle right now, because I believe the Dr. A said at the time, we used called him Dr. A. I said that Dr. A would say at the time, we teach the Bible. We don't teach doctrinal truths. We don't teach moral ethics in the sense of according to certain or ways that you should act according to denominations or anything like this. We teach the Bible. Now, what he meant by that could be debated and so on, whatever side you're on. But what I believed it picked up, and what I, for myself, say, we start, and here I don't want to get into a long discussion, but we were made to have a relationship with God. My faith tells me that he left us the Word of God, the Bible, with a lot of stories that helped us figure out who he was if we read it, wanting to know him. And he wanted it to become real and human, and that's why Jesus came, because then we could see God in human form. And so I say that a bit of my faith story. I say that because Jesus then, how he lived and acted among people, becomes my primary guideline. So if you want to know how to live at peace, but with strong conviction, then you've got to read the story of Jesus and how he tried to help people in various cultures that were not Jewish to know the heart of God, which is a heart of loving kindness. His essence is love. And when we start dividing people up in categories without recognizing, as well as recognizing our own imperfectness, then we can come to the conclusion that we have to be with people who are alike all the time, because then we're secure. So I guess I would say that to answer your question simply, if you want to know how to live, then look at Jesus, whom I believed showed us the way to live. I find sometimes, selfishness is a anathema to God. And when we look at what we're doing or saying, if it has that element of me, check it out. Mm. Is it bringing division? Is it bringing peace? And I'm not saying you let people walk all over you, but I believe that faith in who Jesus is the way to handle life in this messy world. And it's messy every day. I look out my window every day and I see people who have poverty because they are picking up other people's rubbish to be able to make a living. But it doesn't make me of more worth or value than they are. And so I ask myself, what am I doing to encourage and build up? How do I treat is going to make the difference. Oh, I love your little kitty going back. Fritz, yes. Out of this serious cover. Does that Does that answer your
Yeah.
question? How do I answer? That's my answer. It's not being more spiritual or religious, it's having a faith that makes a difference.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you along these same lines, and just to reiterate, kind of going back to the policy and heart of your school, you had mentioned like these two white men were brought in, and you now have these like racially intermixed classes. The laws of separation weren't going to be abolished until like 22 years later from what this is happening. There was a story in the book that said there was someone from the Bureau of the State Secretary who sponsored a student to come in and like give them intel on what was going on. Do you remember that situation?
Yes, I vaguely I do. That was in the beginning of the school, and it was probably in the 70s, in the later 70s, 76 and on, and that whole time. And Dr. A was primarily aware of a person who came into the class and wanted to observe, if not become a student. And so he welcomed them, but he, I think, felt very strongly that this was a person who was checking us all out. You know, I don't remember the story right offhand. I have to read it again, but I do remember that it didn't phase Dr. A. We just carried on with who we were, Nothing was ever came of it, nothing bad or was ever, but we were always aware. I don't think we're ever any of us aware that the government did not know. But here again, when I think about even talking to you, there obviously was God's purpose for this college. There was a certain amount of protection around it because it was building walls when the apartheid had torn them down. It was ahead of time. It wasn't until the late 80s, 1990, that they started talking about a new South Africa because of Mandela being released and talking with the leaders at that time. So we were ahead of time,
Yeah.
living out what the new South Africa.
That's amazing. Around the late 80s, you ended up taking a multi-year sabbatical and stepped away from Cape Town and teaching. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I think when this whole uprising going back in 76, and then at the end of 76, I had this horrible car accident, which was a lessons in itself that I had to face about me and the changes that took place as a result of that.
Just in hearing stories from you, would you say another defining moment in your life?
Yeah, yes, it was. It was in 1976, and it happened about the time we referred to earlier, when there was the uprisings and the riots and so on going on against the educational system and the language in the school that was required. I was going with a group of young people to another township that was probably about a half hour or so away from where we were, where they lived in their township. And I was driving them out there, and it happened to be a night when it was pouring buckets of rain. I mean, you could not get the windscreen wipers fast enough to be able to go. And a drunk driver came out of a side road and crashed into my car. At the time that the car finally stopped, I looked over and I knew Lydia was in a bad way, because there was more blood than I wanted to see. And I tried to test to see if she was alive. I looked at myself, and all I saw was parts of my body we were never supposed to see. My thigh bone here, it was sticking straight up. And then I saw Lydia. And then I looked up and I saw a little sign that I had stuck on my car, a little plaque I'd stuck on my car. And it said, wherever you are, God is. And those, wherever you are, God, those 5 words became peacemaking for me. There became a peace that came over me. And the ambulance came, and it was a whites only. And they were going to take me. And I said, don't, I refused. I refused to go. I said, she is dying. I'm alive, you can see. Take her. It's hazy in my mind whether she actually was taken in that, or another ambulance came along. But they took me later on, about 4 or 5 hours later. I didn't get to the hospital till midnight. And this was about 7:30 at night. And dear policeman was holding an umbrella to keep me dry because I was half in and half out of the car.
Wow.
So that was another in your face of this horrible system that would say, because you have a different color of skin, you can't go in this ambulance. How ugly that is. And she passed away before she got to the hospital. But that family came to my bedside. It was just right around Christmas. It was the 17th of December. I had just climbed Table Mountain the day before. Never to climb it again, that's for sure.
Wow.
But that family stood with me and came by my bed and said, even the day of her memorial service, funeral, the mother came and sat with me and brought the pamphlet to me.
Wow.
I through my bruised and swollen face and everything, laying in that bed, I just was overwhelmed again with the loving kindness. That family became an amazing family that taught me what love was all about. And she and her family, to this day, I'm just a part of them. Without any hate, without any anger at me, because I worked with having to give up the fact that I had been part of killing, in my mind, a person in the country where I had come to live and minister. But God brought healing, and the result of that accident and the damage that was done, the greatest thing was my left leg was damaged so bad that they emphasized on that, and getting me to walk again and giving me the courage to keep trying. And so I carry some of the remnants of all of that physically in my body. In my mind and spirit, I'm at peace. I know this world, you're going to have troubles. We live in a messy world. It happens to beautiful people, and it happened to me. And just to see the Volmic family come around me and work through their own grief and their own healing has been and stood by me even to this day. I am grateful for their love and their kindness. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a really impactful story, especially when you put it in the context of that time in the country. Yeah.
One of the things I learned after I came out of the hospital, but they said I could only come if I had somebody as a carer. Now, I had a 1-bedroom apartment, and I don't know who in the world is going to come. But my dear neighbor, Mrs. Porter, who was like she and I learned together how to navigate this time, and as a white lady. And she came and she says, I'm going to go talk to the manager of the block of flats. She went down there and talked to the manager and said, I need this gal to come and stay with Margaret in her flat. But she is colored. Now, that was against the law. So this guy, again, you saw gems. He looked at her and he looked down at his paper again, she told me, and he looked up and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I know nothing about this.
Mm.
So she went away, and a gal, she came to live with me. Noel and Jean came to live with me for 6 months. And
Wow.
it was against the law.
Yeah.
And all the neighbors knew, but they knew me beforehand.
Mm.
So they just accepted
Yeah.
this, what happens. And so, yeah. But while I was sitting on the bed, I'll tell you this. While I was sitting in the bed with a cast from my toes up to my hip, top of my leg, I got so frustrated one day, and Jean was not coming home till later. And I was hungry or something, and I thought, oh man, do I have to sit here all day? And neighbors were good at bringing in food, but you get frustrated with life and what it is, and I threw my crutch. I thought, no, Gustafson, you did a stupid thing. So I had to sit on my bed the whole day.
Oh, no.
That is good. I didn't have to go to the loo because I would have a real problem. But as a result of that, God put a song into my heart. Sort of sums up how I have to look at life these days. The song goes, every day that we live is a new day because the Lord's compassion never, never fails us. And with each new day, he will prove his faithfulness. His loving kindness is new for every new day, but we must claim this newness. It's from the Lord. Our hope will be in him for every new day. We'll find it good to just wait for the peace that comes from claiming his newness for every new day.
Mm.
So that's how I live. I sing that song every now and again to myself and find that, just you have only this day left. You don't have tomorrow. It may never come. Yesterday's gone. Live for today.
That's lovely.
As the college grew, I became more involved all the way because I didn't know how to say no. I just said yes if I could do something to fill the gap somewhere. And so I carried a big load. So it came up into the 80s, the latter 80s, that I often describe myself as I was driving a semi that had 9 different gears you had to change within a short period of time in a day. And in 1989, it was the end of the year in our college year. In South Africa, we run from January to December. So graduation was coming up. I was sitting in the lounge and I was just marking papers right and left with the courses that I was teaching, with the number of students I had in my class, and planning this and that and what I was responsible for. And I know I had the most troubled look on my face. And one of my colleagues came down and said, "Are you okay?" Well, should you never ask that? Not when you are a person who is struggling.
The tears start coming.
Oh, man, it's like the tears went everywhere. And she said, "What do you want to do? What is happening?" I said, "I can't go on any more like this." And she says, "Well, what do you want to do?" So I said, "I want to quit. I want to study." I felt I had poured myself out and now I needed something to come back in. So I went up to the principal, who was now Ellen Jansen, a dear friend of mine. And Ellen, in the most gracious and listening way, listened to my heart. And he said, "Margie, we don't want you to resign. Take a sabbatical. Go back to the States. Find yourself. Do your studying, whatever, but see it as a sabbatical." So I basically said, "That's it. I'm going to do that." And I packed up everything in my place so that if I never came back, it could be thrown away or shipped over. This is it. I am now going back to the States and starting over.
Mm.
And that's what I did.
This is one of many, I think, defining moments from my perspective of your story, because when you take the sabbatical, you really do find yourself.
Yeah. I decided to go to a seminar led by Michael Card. He was very significant to music at that time. And I was so taken in. And his course was in South Carolina on a university campus there. And so I got on a flight and I signed up for that course. It was a week and a half. It was day and night. You were in classes. I sat down in the first session of that, and he said, but let me remind you, the name of the course was Christ and the Creative Process. And he pointed out how God himself, through Jesus, he was a creator. And to be able for Jesus to come, he had to let go of a lot of things to, as Jesus become human and come into a human body. And consequently, I thought about that, and I realized that I was a yes person who was taking more on all the time. It became clear to me that I had to let go of stuff. Taking this course was not going to help me because it was going to put more pressure on me again. Doing all the assignments, I had to let it go. So I audited the course. But out of that whole thing, it dawned on me that I had an addiction. It came clear to me, that was the analogy that came to me. Gustafson, you are addicted to performance. You seem to have to do. And that made you feel good. And when you got up, people would clap. Way you go, you're doing a good job, or blah, blah, blah. And I was a performer. And I had to give up that need to perform to feel worth and value. And so to this day, I know I have an addiction. I just have to remind myself it's all right to sit back and just be. So that was a significant moment in my life.
So out of that, how do you go from I'm doing too much to learning this really important thing about yourself to then saying, I think I want to go back? I packed all my things up. I was ready to never go back to Africa, but I think I'm going to go back. How did you get there?
That's a good question. And I think that, as I said before, a person, I think of, they don't lose their addiction overnight. And as I think about it now, Megan, I think that I knew what I wanted to do, which was not a part of performing for other people, but doing it for myself. There was an element of there that it would be a plus if I got my master's degree, but I would be doing it for myself first and foremost. So I threw myself into study. And I think that was a part of my healing process, because it was there that also that a counselor, I went into counseling, and I was told that they gave a name to what was going on, but that I had clinical burnout. And that made sense to me from a professional standpoint. And so they gave me guidelines, how to basically look at yourself and what you're doing, and enjoy what you're doing rather than doing it for others. So I think that year and a half it was lovely. I was an ancient of days with younger people, because I got my master's degree when I was half a century years old. So I just was a lot of younger people, but I loved it because I worked with younger people all the time. I loved it. And so that kept me challenged in my mind. So consequently, as I came to the end of those major part of the year, and with the courses that I took, amazing courses on intercultural studies all the way, because that was an emphasis of it, I thought, yeah, I'm ready to go back. I had fed my own soul. And so I was ready to come back.
So what a timely, in the sense of history, what a timely time for you to come back to South Africa. You came back in the early 90s, around 1991. And for those listening, maybe from the US, who don't know much about South African history, on the 27th of April in 1994, there was a new democracy born.
Yes.
And there was a presidency of Nelson Mandela. And you had an acting part in that. You got to vote.
So.
You got to vote him into presidency. That is incredible.
The only time I ever got to vote, but it was incredible. I stood in those lines, and I was in the so-called colored community, and I ended up standing in the line with the family who had been involved in my car accident, and I stood in line with them and shared with the mother of the gal that was killed in my car accident. She considered me as her daughter. I stood in line and had her podcast with me. Well, that's the food she brought along and the drink. Well, we stood in long lines. But yes, to be able to put my mark for a new government was a privilege. And I am grateful that I could stand in line and enjoy the privilege that those around me were having for the first time in their life to vote for a government.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So Nelson Mandela, the one and only, becomes president. South Africa has its first democracy in its history. Fast forward to 2025. It's not perfect. It's not all fixed.
In fact, there's a lot of cracks in it right now.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, having lived through this movement, the abolishment of apartheid, and now you've stayed in South Africa from that time until today.
Yeah.
How would you encourage people who maybe hear your story and are inspired to, cross the line over to their neighbors? How would you encourage people to continue to extend an arm to people who are different?
I think it would start within oneself to say, am I prepared to see this other person as a human being? Am I prepared to see this group of people as humans like me? To find our likeness, how we are alike. We start that. Am I prepared to do that? Am I prepared to, I think the second thing is to listen and learn and to face our own, I think as white people, that we are privileged people, our white privilege, to face that. When we face that our whiteness has given us privilege, globally it's true. And to humble ourselves and learn from others, whatever group of people who are different from me, to learn, humble ourselves and learn from them, to accept other people with worth and value. And maybe you start with just saying hello, hi, can we have a chat? I want to know who you are. So long I'm separated and I want to just start a conversation. It might be having a cup of coffee together, to whatever. I'm struggling for words in a way because I just did it. My purpose for coming here threw me into a situation. So now my challenge is, how do I treat this guy that's laying on the pavement as I walk by? Or how do I greet the people that are serving me who are different from me? Do I make them feel welcome and the people the car guards, we have car guards here, that there is an organization they become a part of. Instead of paying parking meters, you end up paying them. How do I treat them? They say, oh, well, fine, they don't need it, and I don't have the money. But you end up treating them with worth and value, that they have families, they have children, etc., etc. Yeah. To humble oneself, to learn, to listen, to take a risk, to take a risk and see people like yourself, to have worth and value. Yeah, I think uh, that has to be the beginning point. Hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Auntie Margie, thank you so much for spending your afternoon. It's early morning for me, but afternoon for
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much for carving out time to share your story and your heart. I just feel like it's a really important conversation. And I think hearing this conversation from your perspective and through your lens is really impactful and special. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for pushing me, asking me hard questions. And people out there, forgive me. I didn't want to offend anybody, but I'm glad that I could share some of the things I've learned, and so much more to learn. There's so much more to learn.
Mm.
Yeah. And unlearn.
Mm.
So much more to unlearn. I think that's probably true. So thank you, Megan. Thank you for taking time to listen to my story
Mm.
and ask me all those questions.
For you are incredible and I love you. And I'm so grateful to be a part of your family. It's really special to spend time with you and just, yeah, hear more about you. Hey, friends. Thank you so much for listening to that really special conversation that I got to have with my great Aunt Margie. If you are enjoying the show and would like to support, please like, subscribe, or share with a friend. You can also support financially through a link found in the show notes. Thanks again for being here and listening to the telling of the stories of the lives we've lived.